Hey everybody, Brandon here, welcome back to a new video. Today we're going to be covering Game 2 on my 7th tournament, and I just realized my head is shiny, but let's continue. I am playing with the black pieces versus Stone H, and let's see how the game progresses. We see d4 from white, and knight f6 from me, knight f3 and g6. So normally against d4 and knight f3, I just go for the same setup. Whether or not they go for c4 and play into the mainline King's Indian defense, I just play bishop g7, d6, and castle, and it's usually slightly better for white, but it offers interesting play. So e4, knight takes e4. Unfortunately, this pawn was just undefended, and bishop d3. So they're trying to go for some development, though this e4 move just does not make too much sense with knight f6 because I just take the pawn, and they should have just prefaced the move with maybe knight to c3 if they wanted to play e4 that badly, but that is not what happened here. So after e4, knight takes e4, bishop d3. I just retreat my knight. There's also d5. It's just that something like this, you might lose your pawn, you might not. I just didn't see any purpose to go for this when I could just retreat my knight, go down another tempi, go down to tempi here, and I'm just up a pawn. So that is what happened in the game. Bishop g5, bishop to g7, castles and castles. Now my position is quite safe, and I'm pretty happy here. Rook e1 and d5. So now we see rook to e5, which is a little weird. The thing is, we can't really move our knight to e4 because there is some bishop takes e7 stuff. They are attacking our queen. But instead we can just ignore it because eventually this can benefit us if we make a correct move here. So I just played c6. I thought c6 was okay, and in reality it is, because this rook is going to have to move at some point, just because of discoveries with my bishop. So there's no reason to make any quick judgments when you don't have to. That's always going to be a problem in their position until they move the piece, and when they move the piece, then we just won a free move out of them. So c6, knight bd2, and knight bd7. I'm just developing now, and I'm attacking the rook, so now they can move it. Rook to e3, and I played rook to e8. There's also things like c5 in the position, but I understand why I went for rook to e8 because since they don't have the e pawn, they can't play e4, but we have the e pawn and we can play e5. So e5 is a very logical move to go for in this type of position, and that's why rook e8 would be played. So after rook e8, we see knight e5, and I decided to take. After takes, I played knight to g4. The whole reason is because this actually wins us a pawn, where we're attacking the rook, threatening to win an exchange, and we're attacking the pawn. There's no time for things like e6 because we just win the exchange, and after takes, even queen to f3, there's knight to f5. Even if there's g4, this should still be better for us. So yeah, this unfortunately just won't work out for our opponent, because even if we don't win the piece back, we will still win material in the end. So knight to g4, rook to f3, and I took on e5. Now we're just up another pawn. We're up 2 pawns now, and this is a very, very strong position, and conversion wise this should be winnable already. So let's see what happens. Rook to g3, knight takes d3. I decided to take off one of their bishops. Usually in these positions, even though it's not open, it makes sense most of the time just to take the bishop here, and it's just one less thing you have to worry about in the position. Although their bishop wasn't really doing too much against these pawns because they're all in light squares, it's still reasonable to take the bishop. And after pawn takes, bishop takes b2, so I'm just going for every pawn I can. Now I'm up 3 pawns, and after rook b1, bishop g7, they do not have rook takes b7 because my bishop is still in c8. Somehow, not developing one of my minor pieces is actually beneficial, and this can often be the case in some of these lines where you play knight f6 and bishop g7 with g6, is that the bishop is actually quite good on c8, and then eventually it can become a monster because it's still looking near the king in the first place. So there's no reason to really develop it. But after rook to f3, now we have a reason to develop. We can attack the rook and the queen at the same time, technically, because we can attack the rook, and if they move the rook, then we attack the queen. So this is a pin. We put the rook in a pin, and this just wins material here. Queen e1 to get out of the pin. Now they're threatening to move their rook, but I just took the rook, and I protected my b7 pawn. Now we're up in exchange, and we are up 3 pawns. So this should be a very easy win now. It's not even a matter of conversion, it's just playing the right moves, which is any move that, just doesn't lose. Queen e3, now e5. I'm just trying to improve every piece that I can, and the way to do that is by creating a center and gaining space, because when you have more material, the thing you want to do with it is you want to restrict your opponent and give them less options, and just make life harder for them and make counterplay more difficult. So this is exactly what I was going for here. Bishop h6, e4. So if they take, then I can just take with the rook, and this is actually close to what happened, but they played knight to d4 instead, which isn't quite right, because after e takes d3, I'm attacking their queen, and either I'm going to win the knight or I'm going to win the bishop here, because they realistically can't defend both. If they go queen f4, I can take it, bishop takes, and then bishop takes d4, and I win a piece. So this isn't what happened. Instead, they played queen takes d3, but they missed that their bishop was hanging, so I decided to take it. Queen to g3, queen to a5. I mean, knight to f5 is interesting here, but realistically I could go bishop to f8, and this just defends all of these key dark squares, and you don't want to really trade off these pieces. I mean, actually reasonably you still can, because if you trade off these two pieces, the only thing that can really give us issues on the dark squares is the queen, but just the queen, that's not enough material to attack us, so we're not too worried about that. But okay, h3 was played instead, and I took the pawn on a2, because if there's a pawn that's undefended, why not take it? And this is exactly what I was thinking here. And okay, rook to f1, and again this is winning, so I will just go over the final moves here. Bishop g7, queen g4, rook to e4, now I win the knight. Queen to d1, rook takes d4, queen to e1, rook back to e4, queen to d1, rook a to e8, bring in all your pieces, that's what you're supposed to do in these positions, and rook to e1. But after rook to e1, you can take it, queen takes, rook takes, king to h2, bishop to e5, f4, and bishop takes f4 with checkmate. Now we won this game, and we are currently 1.5 out of 2 for this tournament number 7, and there are still 3 games to go. Anyways, I would like to quickly say the moral of the story here is defend your pieces. One of the biggest issues was my opponent was putting their pawns on squares that were not defended and that were attacked by his opponent, and this benefited me in the long run, because when I won specifically the e4 pawn, they lack certain central control in this position where they would have had if they even left the pawn on e3, for example. And because they didn't play a move like e3 or prefaced it with a move like knight to c3 or knight to d2 and play e4, taking one of these central pawns is a big deal, because again, influencing the center is a big part of chess, as if you influence the center, then you control the most of the mobility throughout the entire game. So that is it for today, and I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you then.